I want to share another story with you. I'll talk about GMOs for a moment. I know there's been some talk of that at this conference, but my take on GMOs. What's a GMO? Some people think it means God move over, but it's actually a genetically modified organism. Now, Monsanto, now Bayer, Syngenta, Dow, DuPont, they promised the world that GMOs would give us bigger yields, more drought-resistant crops, better flavor, better nutrition, and less pesticide consumption. Now, 25 years into the mass cultivation of GMOs, we haven't gotten any of that. No better yield, no more drought resistance, no better flavor or nutrition, and we've gotten more pesticides, right? What we have gotten is crops that have one or both of two traits. One is that they are pesticide producers. They produce Bt in every cell of the plant. The other is that they are herbicide tolerant. So now we're eating weed killer. A lot of people know that glyphosate, which is the primary active ingredient in Roundup, the #1 weed killer in use today, is an endocrine disruptor and it's a probable carcinogen. A lot of people do not know that it's also been patented as an antibiotic. So it kills bacteria, and when it gets into our digestive tract, what do you think it's doing? Well, it might be killing bacteria. In the 25 years since glyphosate's been spread more and more on our croplands, we've seen a massive growth in rates of food allergies. And this isn't just theory, and it's just not just paranoid moms taking their kid to the doctor because he got a scraped knee. We're talking about hospitalizations for food allergies have increased fourfold in the last generation. Why is that? Well, our food supply has become toxic in all kinds of ways. GMOs are not the whole story, but it is interesting that there's a direct correlation between the spread and the amount of glyphosate we're consuming and the growth in the number of people who are hospitalized for food allergies, right? And it's possible that there's a connection. Correlation is not causation, but when you see a correlation this strong, I think it's worth considering. So in my own work, partly based on that, partly based on not wanting Monsanto Bayer to dominate the world's food supply, partly based on concerns about safety, partly based on concerns about the 200,000 farmers in India who have taken their own lives as they went the GMO agriculture route and then wound up indebted to Monsanto, losing their farms and trying to save their families from debt by killing themselves 200,000 times. I felt that GMOs were a stand worth taking, that we should have labeling, we should have transparency. And so a number of years ago, Food Revolution Network took on that as one of our campaigns. And there were a number of ballot initiatives, some of you may remember this, in various states. One of those ballot initiatives was in the state of Washington, Initiative 527, which would mandate GMO labeling in the state of Washington. And it was very close. At first, it was everyone supported it, but then the no organizers spent boatloads of money, and they ended up raising more money and spending more money than any other ballot initiative in the history of the state of Washington. And they saturated the airwaves with a lot of ads telling people that this would add $500 per year to the price of grocery bills, which was ridiculous. It was just, we're talking about labeling. They print labels all the time. They put out a lot of fear, and it had an impact. And in the end, the initiative barely lost. But then an interesting thing surfaced. The Grocery Manufacturers Association was the organization that had been the primary funder of the No campaign on I-527 in Washington. They had put in, I think, about $30 million. And then it emerged that there is a law in the state of Washington that you have to disclose your donors. And they had not been doing so. So the state attorney general sued the GMA. And they had to disclose where their money came from. And they got a couple $1 million from Pepsi and $1 million from Coke. And it surfaced that they were raising money from the junk food industry. And around that time, I was with my son River. We were shopping in a natural food store, and I was hot and tired, and my blood sugar was low. And I see this Odwalla smoothie package. It's like, mango tango or something. And I pick it up, and I'm going to drink it. I was even going to have a little bit of it in the store before I paid. And River says, Odwalla's owned by Coke. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, you want to give your money to Coke? And I looked at him, and I was like, oh my God, what have I raised here? And I was like, oh, well, no, but it's just one bottle. And, I'm there. If they sell Odwalla, maybe they'll spend more money on that and less on Coke. And he's like, so you want to give your money to Coke? I'm like, no, thank you, River. And I didn't drink it. And then it hit me. Wow, Coke was trying to hide their donations in the GMO fight because they were afraid of consumer backlash. They actually broke campaign finance law in order to launder the money they put into it. And then it occurred to me, our members don't drink a lot of Coke, but we do drink Odwalla, and Honest Tea, and Dasani, and Vitamin Water, and Zico Coconut Water, all of which are owned by Coca-Cola. And so we launched a campaign calling on Coke to stop fighting and funding the fight against GMO labeling. And we got several 100,000 people signing this petition, and we got a lot of people committing to boycott all of the natural brands Coca-Cola owned. And as we did more research, we realized that Coke sales around the world were starting to go down. But sales of Honest Tea and all these other brands were going up, and that's actually where the company was making its profits. So we got some traction, and we ended up we reached out to Coke, and we said, look, folks, you say in your mission statement that you support transparency and you support consumer empowerment. But here you are on the wrong side of history, fighting transparency and fighting consumer empowerment. And we think it's time for you to change your policies. And we were giving you some incentive to change your policies. Well, interestingly enough, we managed to make contact with the board and senior leadership. And then they said, privately, we are tired of getting a PR black eye for fighting GMO labeling. And we aren't the only ones. We want a national solution, and we want to negotiate with you and the other food movement organizations, see if we can find some common ground. So I ended up facilitating meetings with leadership from Coke, Nestle, American Beverage Association, Mars, bunch of other organizations, and Center for Food Safety, Consumers Union, Food Evolution Network, of course, and Just Label It, among others. We all sat together for a series of meetings over the course of a year and a half in Washington, D.C., and we discovered that we had more in common than you might imagine. And it was fascinating for me to sit at the table with senior vice presidents from a company like Nestle, which, I grew up thinking of them as evil. They were, pushing infant formula in third world countries, and mother's milk they would give free samples just enough so the mother's milk would dry up. And then she can't feed her baby the milk that comes from her own body, and she's hooked on the formula, and then it's with contaminated water, and her kid's getting sick and dying. And I just found that absolutely horrendous when we all know that breast is best. But what they've changed their practices around that. But as I was sitting with all these people, I realized they don't stay up late at night trying to figure out how to kill kids. They're trying to make a buck and make a living and work in a system that pushes them in this certain direction. And a lot of these folks feel downright embarrassed about the products they're pushing. But they justify it however they do. And if they can do the right thing and make it work in the marketplace, heck, most of them will. And so we were having these conversations, and I realized it doesn't do a lot of good if everybody who's good, who tries to make a positive step, goes out of business. We've got to figure out how to make it work. And I started thinking about my grandpa, and I realized we've got to get as good at marketing health as we are at marketing ice cream. And there is so much creativity and ingenuity in the food industry that's going into how to make a killing. And we need to learn how to make a living. And so as I was sitting with these folks, I was inspired by the courage they had as I heard people saying to me, what we're doing isn't working. We don't want to fight consumer right to know. We're just afraid that we're going to have to put the equivalent of a skull and crossbones on our packages, and we're going to lose market share. And who wants that, right? And we're also afraid of a patchwork quilt of different things in different states. So we talked about solutions, and I will tell you that we got to common ground, and we ended up crafting a bill that we had attorneys mutually hired from both sides that we were going to submit to Congress. And given the political climate, the industry was going to submit it to Congress. And we, the food movement, were going to act like we were slightly opposed. But in truth, we loved it. And this was going to be a national GMO labeling bill of sorts. And we had it all worked out. I can't go into the details. But I will say that we were this close. And then Congress and the White House approved a national GMO labeling bill, which is often called the DARK Act, the Deny Americans the Right to Know Act, because it essentially eviscerated the whole concept. But it purported to be about GMO labeling. And once that was passed, the industry said, okay, it's voluntary now. And then, remarkably enough, a number of these companies volunteered. Mars volunteered. They just chose to label when they have GMOs on their packages voluntarily, because they decided out of our conversations that it was the right thing to do to be honest with the consumer. So we can see the change is possible. And for me, that process showed me so much about what it takes to build real alliances. And again, back to my Sun River. Align with the beauty and the integrity and the goodness that is in there somewhere. It may not be manifest through the actions we see, but I believe that we become most effective when we work with whatever spark of good is in people. And I believe there is a spark of good in just about everyone. And it's our job to find it and work with it. When I was about 10 years ago, I was in my mid-30s. I was in Jordan. I was facilitating an international gathering of peacemakers from all over the region. And I was sitting with people from Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Palestinian territories, sitting with people from warring places who literally were risking their lives to sit with each other. Like, if you're from Iran and you sit with someone from Israel, knowingly, then you risk death when you get back home. And people were willing to have the courage to sit with each other because we recognized, all of us, that the status quo in the Middle East was leading to immense suffering and violence that was harming the future of life and well-being for all the kids, and we wanted to do something better. So we sat together, and people were very honest about their struggles and their stories and their challenges, and I was honestly overwhelmed with the pain of the situation. I was with people who had lived through war zones, were living in war zones, grew up in refugee camps, had never been to their home because they had been refugees fleeing for their lives, their entire lives, living under levels of oppression you or I could probably never imagine, levels of fear that we could probably never imagine, and it goes back through generations and generations and generations. And I also was struck not just by all the blood that's on that land going back through thousands of years, but also the sweat and the labor that it takes to survive in deserts. And I was struck by the prayers and the depth of religious passion that was in that land. And I was struck by all the tears and all the loss and all the people who have suffered, and also the tenacity of the human spirit to keep going on. On the last day of that journey, we went to a waterfall on the edge of the Dead Sea. It's at a place called Ma'in Hot Springs. It's a natural hot springs waterfall. You stand under it and the water is literally pounding you so you can barely stand. And as I stood in that waterfall, I could barely stand up, and I felt like I was being cleansed from the depths of the earth. And I found myself sobbing. And what struck me was that I did not have the solution to save the world or to save this part of the world where the problem seemed so deep and so intractable. But then it struck me that I didn't have to. That in fact, all my attachment to changing things was actually keeping me from being present with things as they are. And so this prayer came to me. I found myself weeping, saying time and again, help me to release all ambition, all attachment, and all desire for all that is not so. And that was just pouring through me. And then, after a long while of just weeping with that, I found another prayer come to me. Help me to embrace totally with all that I am, all that is real. And those two sentences are part of my daily practice. Now, I don't know, whatever your orientation is to religion or faith or spirituality, that's not the point here. I shared it with people from all different faiths afterwards, and I didn't know how they would respond, but it seemed to strike a chord. But for me, there is something profound about ceasing to believe that the world is wrong for being how it is. When we truly accept this is how it is, as wrong as it is, as messed up as it is, as horrible as it is, this is what is so. And when we truly allow that to be, then we find our power as a part of it to respond. So all of the heart attacks, all of the cancers, all of the animals living in abject misery, all of the climate destabilization that is wreaking havoc around the world is so. And in that reality, we can face it, we can absorb it, we can let it be, and we can realize that we too are so. That we too are part of the response. We are part of the immune system. And a body has to know it's sick in order to mobilize an immune system. So we know that there is a sickness. We know that the ways of thinking and living and acting that have gotten humanity this far will lead to a suicide for our species if we do not make a change. But we also know that we have inherent within our very DNA itself the capacity to be that change. And I want to close with a quote from George Bernard Shaw. He said, "This is the true joy in life, to be used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. To be a force of nature, instead of a feverish clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy." He said, "I am a member of the community. As a member, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can before I die. Life is no brief candle to me. It is more of a splendid torch, which I want to burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. So I want to thank you for burning your candle or your torch as brightly as you can, for every step you take to be a part of the solution, because together, one bite at a time, one step at a time, one meal at a time, one life at a time, we're changing this world." Thank you.